A common thing many say now concerning Super is that Moro is the best villain, but how true is that? And if so, can he be considered worthy of being mentioned in the same breath as Dragon Ball's greatest villains? It's quite obvious he is the GOAT of Dragon Ball villains, but that's a separate thing.
That's why he's the GOAT! The GOAT!
That said, with his design making this a fitting video theme for Halloween, let's find out. One of the first things noticeable about Moro's place in the story was the question of why didn't he ravage Universe 7 in Trunks' timeline. But this potential plot hole was plugged with the reveals of Dai Kaioshin's God Key, and how the events of the Buu arc directly led to Moro regaining enough magic to break free, thereby following one of the best aspects of many villains in Dragon Ball, of their antagonistic role being a direct consequence of prior events. On the subject of Universe 7, it did seem disappointing at first to have the plot limited to it after multiversal conflicts in 3 prior arcs, but recent reveals with Daima make it obvious Moro must have originated from the Makai and deliver on Toriyama's promise of Daima being a connecting thread to other stories. That mention of the Makai and the magic synonymous with it, Moro being a villain who utilizes magic, was a breath of fresh air from many since Buu, and even after Moro until Goma, that had drifted away from this briefly explored aspect of magic, beyond Zamasu and Gas being made a threat due to the Dragon Balls, and Moro delivered on it well by having an ability Goku and Vegeta couldn't just use brute force against. Unfortunately, this was an aspect that became hit or miss after he regained his youth, where he tended to use strength more until absorbing 7-3. This can be compared a bit to Cell, on both being less reliant on trickery or strategy after achieving their main goal, but a criticism separating them is that while Cell's composition led to him remaining an established threat with what he could accomplish, and even causing some crucial consequences to the story, such as Goku's demise, Gohan changing his attitude towards battle, or Vegeta realizing the value of Trunks, the structure of Super made what Moro could do far more limited, with the only consequences after his defeat being Buu's Daikaioshin memories fading, and Meris becoming immortal, both of which were exclusive to this arc, rather than broader aspects of the series. There was the potential of making future stakes far greater, with him wiping out most of the Namekians, but even this is reversed during the climax. Sticking with the theme of comparisons, a criticism many had initially was that he took too much from prior villains, with the goal of Piccolo Daimao, the energy draining of 19 and 20, the later demeanor of Cell, and him being sealed away, being like Buu. I wouldn't say this holds much weight, as, while he clearly borrows elements from these, he goes about them in his own way, such as his energy draining being far different, and even closer to an evil Genki-dama counterpart, which makes him draw from Baby more, if anything. That is quite ironic when that technique led to his resurgence, and he brings a few new things to the table, compared to those I mentioned. For instance, he is more reliant and reverent towards his subordinates than any past villainous groups, other than the Red Ribbon Army or Babidi, with him acknowledging the worth of 7-3's abilities, or Sagambo's command over his Gan, as genuinely useful tools, rather than a reason to be lazy. In the same way, Frieza sees his as a means to not get out his chair, although he clearly doesn't care about their lives. Moro sees each as important to achieving his goal, which also makes those such as Cranberry or 7-3 key building blocks to the narrative, despite their limited characterization. One criticism of this though is that he makes his use of them as tools to be disposed of as he wants, far more blatant than other leaders, to the point it seems like a missed opportunity no traitors emerged from his ranks. With that mention of characterization, this is what can be seen as a weaker part of Moro's role, as his personality doesn't really do much not already covered by past villains mentioned. His main traits of callousness and arrogance, having him seem like a discount sale at times, as well as one redundant aspect of how his abilities work is his stolen powers being beaten by those gained through effort or unity, adding nothing to what was already done with Boo, Baby, and Yi Shinlon. One unique thing to that Cell comparison though is how he acquired this ego, whereas Cell's belief in his perfection was from Geralt's computer feeding him this assurance of a predestined path. Moro finding nobody whose power could do more than halt his ability to make all in the universe his food, fed him with the belief of being the ultimate life form, with proof from experience. This is also distinct from Frieza, who acts within the confines of the gods, rather than challenging their superiority. This has Moro do a common thing praiseworthy amongst Dragon Ball's villains, in acting as a parallel to Goku's goal of one day matching the likes of Beerus, but more from his desire to test himself with the ideals of Buddha, rather than selfishly being the strongest like Moro. His hunger for planets can also be seen as a hyperbolization of Goku's appetite in an unrestricted form, but that's not exactly a new parallel, as you'll be aware of if having seen my video on Boo and Goku's parallels. There are also a few parallels in their cultural inspirations, with Moro's inflated sense of self and opposing the gods, drawing from Sun Wukon's initial self, in comparison to Goku representing his growth after attaining Buddhahood. But again, this is quite a common thing with Dragon Ball's antagonists. That said, even with limited characterization, an antagonist can still be an effective and well-written one based on how they contrast with and oppose the protagonist. Compared to most to come before him though, Moro isn't the most successful beyond the surface level accomplishment of being strong enough to push Goku physically more than many others. If anything, there are more ties to Vegeta, with his actions reflecting many facets of Vegeta's past self, as well as the arc drawing attention to Vegeta's growth, in his guilt at what he did on Namek, or going through what Goku went through on Yardrat, along with becoming the direct counter to Moro's abilities. The character with the strongest contrast with Moro is Boo, not only through Daikaioshin's past, but both now being ancient creatures with magic and great appetite, where one has refined their nature and the other gives in to theirs. But Boo's role unfortunately takes a backseat after New Namek, beyond helping guide Oob a little, and what character changes he went through, being reset at the end. The other character Moro is contrasted with is Merit, but this isn't in a way much deeper than that of lawful good versus chaotic evil. All that said, is Moro one of Dragon Ball's best villains? Not by a long shot. Can he at least be Super's best villain though? Well, he's definitely far better written than Gas or Cell Max, and though Zamasu's parallels to other characters were more interesting, the flaws of his plan, despite the scope of knowledge he has, makes Moro be more intelligently written too. Elec was by far the most unconventional villain in Super, but what interesting aspects he held ended up falling flat by the end of the Granola arc, with how simple-minded his plans with the Dragon Balls ended up being. I would still say that the character growth gone through by Frieza makes him a far more interesting villain, though maybe Moro can get the best supervillain title if continuations of the manga happen to ruin what was built up with Frieza. Still, I guess a competitor for the title is still better than nothing. Thank you for watching through this analysis. Request what else you'd like to see me analyze, like and subscribe, as well as check out some older ones. On the subject of DBS villain analyses, maybe you'd like to check out this comparative one between Baby and Zamasu, that, while I no longer 100% agree with all presented there, may have a few interesting points for you to consider.